Barakatah Yahweh, Barakatah Yahweh Bahasham, Barakahak Wadash, Barakatum. First and foremost, I want to give all praises, glory, and infinite honors to Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahweh. Double honors to the apostles and elders, a great millstone who rule and teach well. In peace and salutations to you sincere Akim out there, pushing this word in truth and sincerity to the four corners of the globe. May you brothers endure until the end. This is the brother Ra'aya coming at you with another lesson, and I'm going to start it off in Mark chapter 3, verses 24 to 25. And if a kingdom be divided against itself, that kingdom cannot stand. And if a house be divided against itself, that house cannot stand. And a house can go into a nation, tribe, or race of people. And if you've been paying attention to things out here, you can see that the house of Esau Edom, the so-called white man, especially in the West, primarily in the United States of America, is divided on damn near every level you can be divided on, especially in the political spectrum. And you're seeing more and more of these American Edomites wake up to the fact that the United States of America is a prostitute to, the state of Israel, and just these 1948ers in general, which they're Edomites as well, of the tribe of Amalek. And I opened up the video with this verse to preface this article from timesofisrael.com titled, MAGA Civil War Over Israel Erupts into the Open at Turning Point USA Conference. And Turning Point was an organization started by the late Captain C. Kirk. Ben Shapiro attacks conservative leaders for not calling out seaspiracy theorists. Steve Bannon says Shapiro is a censor who wants U.S. to put Israel's interests first, which, that's rich coming from Steve Bannon, who's a big supporter of Nero 47, which, Nero 47 is probably the biggest prostitute president we've ever had for the 1948ers. But regardless, as we're about to read in this article, there's a lot of divisions between these Edomites, in this case, these conservative Edomites with these 1948ers at this Turning Point USA conference. And, as we get closer and closer, to Esau losing power and the collapse of the United States of America, you're going to see more of these Edomites call out these 1948ers. And it's eventually going to get to, a lot of violence taking place, not just between these, conservative Edomites and these Amalekite Edomites, but just the house of Esau Edom as a whole. But let's get into it. The first major gathering of Turning Point USA since the deletion of its influential founder, Captain Kirk, laid bare divisions over, the 1948ers and the embrace of anti-simulation figures. Key figures in the Make America Great Again movement took to the stage in Phoenix on Thursday and Friday to tear into each other, blasting opponents for cozying up to fascists or accusing them of besmirching the memory of, Captain Kirk. And, with Captain Kirk, you've had Candace Owens really be heavy into the seaspiracies that the 1948ers had something to do with his deletion. So it's just a shit show all around, Influential podcaster Ben Shapiro, who's a 1948er, came straight out of the gate, attacking former Fox News host Tucker Carlson for an uncritical interview with self-described Edomite nationalist Nick Fuentes, which, not only is he a sodomite, but, I believe he's a crypto Amalekite Edomite, but that's neither here nor there. Shapiro sharply criticized Carlson for interviewing the outspoken anti-simulationite on his podcast, calling it an act of moral imbecility. The Jayish podcaster attacking Carlson for a second time within days said the former Fox News host should have never given publicity to Fuentes, whom he called a Hitler apologist, Nazi-loving, anti-American piece of refuse. Kirk had despised Fuentes, Shapiro added. He knew that Nick Fuentes is an evil troll and that building him up is an act of moral imbecility, and that is precisely what Tucker Carlson did. Shapiro also hit out at Carlson and other leaders within the conservative movement, including broadcaster Megyn Kelly, over what he said was their failure to call out figures such as Candace Owens, who often spreads conspiracy theories, many of them anti-simulationist. And like I just said, she's been in heavy with the Seaspiracy that the 1948ers had something to do with Captain Kirk's deletion, but she's also just been heavily, as it said, getting on you 1948ers in general. There was that one, I think it was on Piers Morgan, one interview where she was going against a rabbi and quoted Revelation 2 verse 9. So, not just among these Edomites, but it's starting to grow amongst these other nations, that distrust towards you 1948ers, and seeing that, not just is Esau, Edom, the root cause of a lot of problems on the face of the earth, but at the head of that, you 1948ers, which, real quick, this is the book of Obadiah, chapter 1. I'm reading verses 1 to 2. And this whole book is dedicated to the judgment and the downfall of you Edomites. As the header reads, Edom will be humbled. The vision of Obadiah. Thus saith the Lord Yahweh concerning Edom. We have heard a rumor from Yahweh, and an ambassador is sent among the heathen. Arise ye, and let us rise up against her in battle, which is ultimately what's going to happen during World War III. Verse 2, Behold, I have made thee small among the heathen. Thou art greatly despised. And that can go into, you being the actual global minority on the face of the earth. And also what? Your reputation being small, made small, and hated and despised. These nations, getting on you Edomites in the West for your colonialist practices and just constantly being in everybody's business. And then on top of that, what? People getting on you 1948ers because they see that, you're the money behind a lot of these issues out here. And as we're going into that article, a lot of these conservative Edomites, are calling you out more and more for being the pimp to America's prostitute. Owens has alleged, without evidence, that 1948er spies were involved in Kirk's deletion. There you go. And that he was betrayed by people close to him. Authorities say his deleter acted alone. Owens, whose YouTube channel has 5.7 million subscribers, is also involved in a legal fight with French President Emmanuel Macron over her claims that his wife Brigitte is actually a man. The conservative movement is also in danger from charlatans who claim to speak in the name of principle, but actually traffic in conspiracism and dishonesty, Shapiro said. Those of us with a microphone have a moral obligation to call that out by name. And, that's ironic coming from Ben Shapiro, who's just another disingenuous talking head out here who pulls statistics and falsehoods out of his ass to prove his narrative. There was a quote he had recently saying that, look, if Americans don't have enough money for retirement or to live comfortably, they just need to work harder. Knowing damn well that a lot of our taxpayer dollars go over to the 1948ers over in the Holy Land. They've got universal health care. I believe they get their education paid for. And, information's come out that a lot of those settlers that move into, seize Palestinian land, which, that's not their land either. Those Palestinian Arabs or Ishmaelites, they're squatters as well. But a lot of them, don't have to work and live off of welfare from guess who? U.S. taxpayer dollars. And, more and more these American Edomites are waking up to it and calling it out. Hence why, you're having spats like this at a Turning Point USA conference. Owens responded a day later, writing on X that every time Ben speaks, I feel more certain the 1948ers are involved in Captain Kirk's deletion. Ben only cares about 1948er interests, so the 1948ers are involved, Owens claimed. Carlson also shot back, mocking Shapiro for suggesting censorship, which he claimed was anathema to the Turning Point founder. Deplatforming and denouncing people at a Captain Kirk event. I'm like, what? It's hilarious, he told the audience a few hours later. Carlson also denied being anti-simulationist, saying it was immoral to hate people for how they were born. He then downplayed the problem of anti-Jewish hate by claiming it's less pervasive than bias against so-called white men, Edomites. That is racism that is precisely as bad as anti-simulationism, but it is much more widespread and has been so far much more damaging, he said. And going back to that Obadiah 1 verse 2, I have made thee small amongst the heathen, thou art greatly despised. And Edomites as a whole are despised. Carlson also dismissed the idea of a civil war in Trump world as totally fake, saying, a narrative of tension is ginned up by people who hope to prevent Vice President J.D. Vance from becoming the Republicans, next leader. And, recently, he said, speaking of J.D. Vance, he said something along the lines of, hey, you don't need to feel ashamed for being white anymore. So these Edomites are just feeling it from all levels. Steve Bannon also responded a day later in a speech in which he accused Shapiro of wanting to take over Turning Point USA and put the 1948ers' interests ahead of the United States, NBC News reported. Ben Shapiro is like a censor, and that censor spreads, Bannon said, to the cheers of thousands. This is a proxy on 28, said Bannon, a top advisor to Nero 47, during the 2016 campaign, according to NBC News, claiming that Kirk opposed this concept of a greater 1948er state and 1948er first. And Kelly, speaking of Megyn Kelly, said during a talk with conservative influencer Jack Posobiec at the conference that there was a rift even before we lost Charlie and revolved around the 1948ers, NBC reported. Prior to his deletion, Captain Kirk at times questioned U.S. backing for some of the 1948ers' policies. That's it with this article. But hey, this is just another window into the division of the house of Esau Edom, especially between, your average everyday Edomite and these 1948er Edomites. And as I said, if a house be divided against itself, that house cannot stand. And that's exactly what's coming down the pipeline for the United States of America. And, Esau, Edom as a whole. Because more and more Edomites are going to wake up to the fact that, their taxpayer dollars and, pretty much everything that could benefit them is going to the 1948ers. And once, they get to that point to where their back's against a wall, they just feel they can't afford anything anymore. There's no more future for the country or for their families, and they're going to lash out. This is Isaiah chapter 19, verse 2. And I will set the Egyptians against the Egyptians. And this is speaking about the spiritual Egyptians as pursuant to Revelation 11, verse 8. These Americans, especially these American Edomites. And I will set the Egyptians, the Americans against the Americans, and they shall fight, everyone against his brother and everyone against his neighbor, city against city and kingdom against kingdom. So, these people are just talking right now, But, like I've been saying, it's going to get to the point to where it's going to get violent out here. People are going to be coming, against the neighbors. They're going to be coming against those in the government because they see that these government officials never had their best interests at heart and have continued to sell them out. And hey, that anti-simulationism you Amalekites talk about, and you're going to experience it, in real time. But another thing too is this is just another example of the curses falling upon our enemies, which brings me to Deuteronomy chapter 30, verse 7. And Yahweh thy power will put all these curses upon thine enemies and on them that hated thee, which persecuted thee. And when you go to Psalms chapter 83, you can see the table of nations that have confederated themselves against the children of Israel. And the first nation mentioned was Esau. And then you Amalekite Edomites are mentioned as well, because you Amalekites, not only have you stolen our identity and built a whole, paradigm and falsehood to push that narrative, but what? Y'all had a hand in funding the transatlantic slave trade. Y'all have a hand in funding, the music and rap industry, all these things. But the curses we're seeing come upon our enemies in this case is, as it says in Deuteronomy 28, verse 54, so that a man that is tender among you and very delicate, his eye shall be evil toward his brother. And when you look at the so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans who are, the true children of Israel, especially amongst the southern kingdom, so-called Negroes, the tribe of Judah, we can see that this curse has heavily, afflicted our people with what they call black on black crime, and this hatred you see with one so-called Negro man against another so-called Negro man. So and then when we go to the northern kingdom, the so-called Latinos, it may not seem as pervasive when they come to America, but go to Central and South America and see how much they hate each other. So-called Mexicans hate so-called Hondurans. Hondurans hate Dominicans. Dominicans hate Puerto Ricans, etc., etc. But again, so that a man that is tender among you and very delicate, his eye shall be evil toward his brother and toward the wife of his bosom and toward the remnant of his children, which he shall leave. And you see, again, especially amongst the southern kingdom, a lot of broken families out here. But, this is a curse which we are seeing fall upon these Edomites, a man having an evil eye toward his brother. With the average, everyday, Edomite turning against these Amalekite Edomites, Republican against Democrat, straight against alphabet, man against woman, which what did it also say? And toward the wife of his bosom. You've got this whole MGTOW red pill movement where the Edomite man and Edomite woman are at odds with each other. Religious Edomite against atheistic Edomite. The list goes on. And we can see, how detrimental it was when the 12 tribes of Israel, were divided against each other. When the southern kingdom broke away from the northern kingdom, we fell as a people. And here we are thousands of years later with, you have the elect waking up, but for the majority of our people, they're still, in this spirit of having an evil eye towards each other. So we're seeing how detrimental it was for our people. What do you think it's going to be when, how do you think it's going to be as these divisions and this house divided amongst Esau, Edom is? Like we read in Isaiah chapter 19, verse 2, they're going to eventually fight against each other, on the streets of America and, everywhere, these Edomites dwell as a whole. Salakia, hold on a second. But yeah, that's pretty much it with this video. You get the point. But as it says in Sirach chapter 25, one of the most beautiful things to see is the downfall of our enemies. And we can clearly see Esau, Edom is on the downfall. And the ones that have next are the true children of Israel, which in the kingdom, our house and our kingdom is going to be together and not divided. So we're never going to fall again. But that's it with this video. With this video, I hope you're sincere, Akim and Akwath were edified. Just keep strong. We are almost out of this final wicked captivity of the heathen nations, chiefly of the Edomites. And as always, I'm going to say Abad Babal, Kwam Yasharala.